warriors who dominated half the globe, Rankindel, a lineage of famed fighters, each with remarkable skill and power. Its members became unmatched leaders of the world. Battle, triumph, control. That was the slogan of the warrior family, the clan to which the protagonist belongs, Jean Rankindel, the youngest in the lineage. At the choosing ritual that shaped his destiny, the lad picked the blade of the clan's chief. He was the one destined to guide the family. Scratching his jaw, his father remarked then that his selection met hopes and found it curious. The youth was certain that victory, and naturally fame lay ahead, but this proved false. He lacked skill in swordplay. The lad rested his wooden blade on the dirt, while he heard that his practice was pointless. He himself hailed from the Rankindel lineage, so why couldn't he wield a sword? They called him a shame to Rankindel, a disgrace to the clan, plainly not meeting the family's benchmarks, the weakest swordsman in the clan's records. During practice, someone shouted the hero's name. The siblings neared the youth, and one asked why he was swinging his foolish blade again, to which another proposed dropping it since a failure only needs a unique sword. With a taunting grin, the fair-haired twin pointed out where the unique blade was, and the other agreed, saying he meant the same. The younger wasn't fit for Barasada, that's why he waved a stick. Jean gazed downward. Hatton stepped closer to the younger and questioned why he stayed quiet. Kicking his foot, the rogue demanded a reply. He struck the youth in the side with his knee and boasted that he and his twin were his mighty siblings. Holding his hand to his belly, the lad collapsed, and they labeled him a weakling. The hero glanced back at the blade, and as he reached for it, the second twin asked why he troubled so much. Stumping on his brother's hand, the rogue added that his practice was useless. The youth gritted his teeth. At that moment, Daytona flashed some documents and asked what they were, reading aloud that they were the fundamentals of swordplay. Brandishing the book, the bully sneered that the little one truly believed he'd read a complex book and instantly master fencing. The fair-haired one snapped the wooden blade in two and stated that such nobodies weren't worthy of an opportunity, while the other pleaded with him to stop and surrender his belongings. The blade groaned under the strain, while the elder insisted he should abandon such an opportunity. Ignoring the hero's begs, the dark-haired one finished ripping the book, saying such folks forgot their role. The youth stared in dismay at the remnants of his possessions when the siblings added that he was holding on to hope for nothing. While the twins stomped the fragments, the younger asked why they treated him this way, but the next instant he was seized by the hair. Tossing the lad to the ground, the bully answered that it was for his own benefit, and he did nothing but complain. The second clarified. Did the caretaker teach him this? And the poor lad yelled that it had nothing to do with Gilly. The hero's eyes mirrored the faces of the villains until they, noting that he still dared to defy them, decided he'd need to be taught manners. Cruel siblings, total lack of ability. Standing up, Jean resolved that he shouldn't care about this. He needed to keep practicing. Breathing hard, the youth thought that only through steady effort would he gain approval from the clan and be acknowledged as a Rankindel. That was his belief. But soon the gates to his home shut, and he was told that from then on, he was no longer part of the lineage. A breeze tugged the edge of the youth's cape. He stared at the gate, confused. He clenched his hand, repeating that they considered his efforts. Smiling sadly, the lad concluded that this is why he was spared, and so, at age 25, he was exiled from his clan and doomed to a wretched, purposeless life. It was then he encountered the mentor, and he discovered he had ability. Not just ability, but a gift for magic, banned in his family. 3 years later, the protagonist was studying in the library, reading that one must blend natural energy with one's own to restore it. Standing by the desk, the youth added that one must then fortify the visible energy. Suddenly, a shadow cloaked the startled mage. He found himself alone in the dark. The lad's eyes widened when he saw something. Turning, Jean asked who it was. The massive figure looming over him named itself Solderit, the ruler of shadows. Holding the hero in his hand, the giant spoke his full name. The youth gazed at his speaker in shock as he offered to form a pact with him on behalf of the shadow deity. Raising his arm, the ruler added that if he agreed, he'd not only gain control over shadows but also break any spell. But then the giant spotted the chains tied to the lad's heart and was astonished. Imagine, the shadows stirred when the ruler noticed that someone clearly despised him in his youth. Shrinking to the size of the speaker, the giant remarked that his gift was locked by a spell. He confirmed and got agreement. Inspecting the seal, the ruler called it a trick of a blade. It blocked the ability to fence. Such a dreadful spell couldn't strike a Rankindel. Plunging his fingers into the seal, the Lord of Shadows understood it all. That's what drew him. To the hero's amazement, the chains broke apart, and the deity's messenger declared that from then on, no spell would harm him. Towering over the youth again, the giant stated that all he needed now was to become a great warrior mage. The lad looked at the ruler with thanks, and he added that he'd enjoy watching him. The shadows faded. and the mage stood in the same room. He breathed slowly, then grabbed the blade on the desk. Jean dashed outside. He swiftly drew the blade from its case and made the first swing. Lifting the weapon, the hero realized everything was as Solderit said. Each time he gripped the sword, he reached new peaks. The youth's face showed joy when he felt how light the blade was. Continuing to thrust, the mage sensed it was weightless like a feather, as if nothing was in his hands. He thrust repeatedly, then raised his arm, deciding to add some magic. The blade in his hands shone, and the protagonist realized the worst swordsman in history with his name was gone. Breathing heavily, the youth thought that at last, his efforts bore fruit. Continuing to savor his regained skills, the magician didn't notice something, namely a band of unknown warriors watching him. Blood streamed from the lad's eyes. Reaching with a shaky hand, he couldn't believe he heard no cries. Buried under stones, the hero couldn't grasp why his body felt so heavy. His sight blurred. Hearing steps, the dying youth called for the mentor, then Solderit. His eyes closed, and he couldn't tell if anyone was there. Looking at the book among the debris, he didn't believe he died in his sleep. Was this because he was truly worthless? Pieces of the sword lay under the stones, and the dying mage thought he'd only just had a chance to blend magic with Solderit's power. His eyes shut, and the hero's final thought was, if it all had to end this way, why was he given a chance? The next moment, he saw green grass and tiny hands. Looking around, Jean saw his family members. Then his gaze fixed on the blade in the ground, and he couldn't grasp what was happening because he was surely dead. A girl bent over the lad, telling him not to lower his head, and he recognized his caretaker, Gilly. Where did she come from? But then among many blades, he spotted one special one, Barasada, the sword of the clan's chief. The surprised child raised his brows. Crawling toward the blade, it hit him that this was a choosing ritual. Continuing to crawl, the hero realized he'd returned to the past. Pulling his hand from the grass, he recalled he was now only a year old. The lad reached forward. In his past life, he'd picked this sword by mere luck. The tiny lad's hand touched the blade's edge. The crowd's faces varied from joy to rage, but still, the young master chose the clan chief's sword. Firmly eyeing the sword's handle, the protagonist decided that in this life, he'd control everything. His kin's eyes widened, they couldn't believe it. Continuing to watch the little lad, they didn't believe Master Jean picked the chief's sword despite others. The father declared that the youngest chose Barasada. The blade stayed put when the ritual's end was announced. The little lad sat beside it. When the clan chief ordered him sent to Bure Castle, 6 years later in Bure Castle, during a storm, the lad's hand reached for the top shelf. Looking up, the hero realized he couldn't reach. Dragging a chair, Jean recalled that 6 years had passed since he was sent here. Climbing the chair, the hero mentally noted that, per clan rules, he'd stay in the castle until age 10, meaning 3 years remained. Eyeing the book, the mage thought he was bored. The lad turned when he heard a sound outside. The young master found the caretaker scared and asked what happened. A dead bird lay on his room's floor. The lad's face darkened as he realized only 2 in the castle could do such a thing. The girl spun around when she heard voices. The twins entered with taunting grins, talking about the poor bird. Mockingly eyeing his younger sibling, Detona lamented that the servants found it. With the same look, Detona echoed his twin, saying they'd prepared it for Jean. The hero silently stared at the bird while the elders asked if he liked the gift, and were sure he was touched to tears. The lad recalled that the twins would grow into cruel killers. Wrapping the body in a cloth, the mage noted to himself that they were only 9 now, and they'd already slain a helpless bird just to torment him. Still grinning, the fair-haired one told the younger not to weep because it was irritating, but the little one didn't turn, and they thought he didn't hear them. Continuing to eye the hero with mocking glances, the twins concluded that the future clan chief didn't value them. And somewhere, so sat Bari. The hero whispered something. The fair-haired one cupped his ear and asked him to repeat. He grabbed the younger by the shoulder and swung his fist, yelling that if he wanted to be heard, he should speak louder. But then the lad caught his elder sibling's fist. He stared at the little one in shock. Calmly eyeing Hatton, the lad repeated that he should be quiet. The next moment the hero struck the bully in the jaw. He instantly raged and roared, "How dare he!" In response, the lad hit his sibling again and again. Swinging for a third strike, the mage said he'd endured them long enough. Toppling the fair-haired one, the hero added that his patience broke. The sounds of hits echoed in the room for several minutes. Releasing the shadows, the lad declared what he wanted from then on. Raising his brows, he warned them not to be seen again. At that moment, a warrior burst in and asked what was happening. The young master turned and called his name. Eyeing the twins on the floor, Khan asked what he'd done. The man frowned when the youth replied that they'd fought each other. Glaring at the warrior with displeasure, the lad repeated that they fought and then suddenly fell. Lifting a twin, the man thought no one expected less from a Rankindal. Even children are ruthless, and said aloud that it was fine. Carrying the fair-haired one, the warrior said he understood and would take them to a healer, but the hero objected that they didn't need a healer now. Turning, the lad ordered to follow him. It kept raining outside. The youth gathered a pile of wet soil, then stood. The twins lay under a tree with a grim image at their feet. Eyeing the boys, the warrior asked the young master if he meant to leave them there. Frowning, the man noted the rain was worsening. Casting a cold glance at Khan, the lad replied that they needed to reflect on their actions. Pressing his fist to his chest, the warrior stated, "As the master commands." The hero headed to the castle. The warrior followed, staring intently at his back. A furrow appeared between his brows as the man realized the youth's power wasn't like an aura. Recalling the dark mark on the child's fingers, he couldn't believe it, but it seemed like magic. Watching the young master open the gate, the warrior thought that if he was right, there were bigger issues than the siblings to fight. Frowning, the warrior decided he must report to the leader. Turning to a servant he spotted, the man called out, and he turned. Gloomily eyeing the lad, the warrior ordered his horse readied. Jean saw through the window how the warrior prepared to leave. Raising a brow, the hero realized he'd expected it, and he'd report to his father. Watching the warrior depart, the lad reminded himself that Khan wasn't just guarding but also observing them. Summoning shadows to his finger, the mage thought that since the warrior believed he had magic, he wouldn't give up easily. Reviewing the shadow energy, the lad called it proof of his pact with Soldret. Sitting in a chair, the hero mentally added that, thanks to this power, he realized even death didn't break their pact. Recalling his early years, the lad realized that, thanks to his immunity to spells, the blade trick didn't affect him. Clenching his hand, the young master decided that Jean Rankendall, the family's shame, no longer existed. Many things would differ from his past life. Smiling faintly, the lad thought that now was the time to meet his father. The kneeling Khan finished his account. The clan chief said the youngest had beaten the twins. Without eyeing the servant, the man ordered the flag bearers assembled. The warrior frowned. Two fighters turned, hearing from their father that he was visiting the youngest. He took steps forward. A subordinate bowed and reported that 7 Rankendall flag bearers and 200 warriors were at his service. Without altering his expression, the man noted that was good. The fair-haired girl calmly looked ahead. The red-eyed man scowled. The dark-haired girl grinned brightly, and one of the flag bearers yawned. The clan chief's cloak fluttered. The group, led by Chiron, moved to Bury Castle. Placing her hands behind her head, Marie remarked that everyone was gathered so suddenly. She asked her brother if he knew why, as she'd asked Luna, but she seemed unaware. While the lad scratched his jaw, the girl said she had no time for this. She needed to defeat mages, and he noted the twins had only a year left. It was unlikely the issue was them. Turning to his sister, Diff recalled their father went to see the youngest. Didn't she know? The warrior grabbed her head when, answering her question why they were visiting the youngest, her brother reminded her he'd chosen the chief's sword at the ritual, and admitted she'd forgotten. Eyeing her father's back, the girl wondered if that was the only reason. But she couldn't grasp his thoughts. Luna signaled silence with her finger and called the siblings' names, and her sister apologized. Raising her brows, the warrior thought their father chose to personally visit the little one. As she walked, she wondered if the lad was truly special. Jill fixed her charge's tie, and said they'd heard the leader was coming to see them. She guessed he wanted to see the children, and he replied, "Who knows?" Adjusting his sleeves, the hero thought Khan likely told him everything. Turning to the caretaker to fix his hair, the lad continued thinking that he was foolish and wouldn't have said it outright. He probably just described what he saw. The lad's face grew bored while his hair was combed, and he thought the youngest's power wasn't like an aura or magic. The leader wanted to understand what it was. Continuing to look forward, the mage concluded his father would want to see if this power, or he himself, could be useful. When the castle gates opened, the young master finished that his father would check if the youngest son would add to the family's greatness and wealth. A group of warriors entered. They moved with blades in hand. When the clan chief appeared, he was greeted with grand ceremony. Raising Barasada's handle, the man ordered the twins brought. Soon the troublemakers stood before their father's eyes, and he called their names. They looked at the clan chief in fear when he said he'd heard they'd fought with Jean, and demanded to know their fault. The boys glanced at each other, and said they'd argued over nothing, and the youngest attacked first. Recalling the little one's face, the sons added that he'd struck them with his strange power, not like an aura. The man narrowed his eyes when he heard it seemed like magic. Grinning, the children reminded him that magic was forbidden in their clan. Marie exhaled deeply when the boys claimed that this was true. If Jean had magic, he needed to be questioned. But their father commanded them to stay quiet. Looming over his sons, the man instructed them to remember once and for all. The leader's eyes grew dark as he stated that they would not thrive in the Rankindel family like this. The twins gazed at their father in fear, and his father demanded Jean be brought. Glancing back at his brothers as they departed, the protagonist recalled that his father, Chiron, was the mightiest and most aloof man in the world, the greatest champion of their era, a demigod, the essence of a knight. After he stopped being a mere man, he lost most of his feelings. Now the man was fixated only on the clan and its growth. To him, someone without skill for swordplay was just a void. Shutting his eyes, the boy reminded himself that everything was altered now. Firmly looking ahead, he resolved that in this life he would earn everyone's respect. The young master opened the doors. Everyone present stared at him. The boy stepped into the hall, kneeling down. The champion greeted the master. The man scowled and asked why he called him master and not father. The champion looked at him with sincere eyes and reminded him that there were brothers, sisters, and knights here. Luna's eyebrows lifted when the youth added that there were several hundred people here, so he decided that the visit was formal, so he chose the proper, in his view, address, to which his father found the response complete. Closing his eyes, the head of the family replied to the younger's thoughts, that he was in the castle for another purpose today, so he could call him father. Pointing a finger at the boy, he said that he would ask him the same question as the twins. Staring at his son gravely, the knight clarified what drove him to such actions. Clenching his fist, Jean collected his thoughts. Pressing his fist to his chest, the champion answered that it was about vengeance. Marie marveled when the younger reminded that every Rankindel must repay what he earned. The girl grinned when the boy continued that it did not matter whether they did good or evil to him. The head did not respond immediately. The hare looked at his father in surprise when he commanded everyone except him to leave the hall. The knights glanced at each other, wondering if the younger had passed the head's trial. One of the flag bearers ordered not to linger but to follow the command, and the knights complied. Soon everyone headed for the exit. Mary glanced at her younger brother, noting his private talk with his father. The leader was shutting the door, and the girl thought that it was not bad for the little kid. Turning to his son, the man said that he would like to ask him a few questions personally. The twins claimed that he had some kind of unique power. The boy lowered his head while his father reminded him that Rankindel was forbidden to use magic, because then it was impossible to fully focus on swordplay and reach the height of skill. Towering over the child, the leader demanded to know what kind of power it was. Looking up at his father, the champion heard that if it was magic, then he would not ignore it, but the boy smiled. As long as his father did not know about his abilities, he would not leave him alone because it was the power of Soldret, releasing shadows. The younger lied that he himself did not know what it could be, magic or perhaps an aura. The energy began to gather in the palm of the youth, and he added that he himself was curious about what it was called. The darkness collected in the hands of the young master into a sphere. With a faint smile, he asked his father to help him understand it if he did not mind. Shock appeared in the gaze of the head of the family. Looking at the shadow mass in the hands of his youngest son, Chiron recognized in this the power of the founder of their family. Chiron, frowning, stared at his son, saying to himself that he wielded the energy of shadows. In the hands of the protagonist was a mighty cloud of energy. The man recalled how Jean, when he was still small, chose a massive orb. He saw Barisad behind him and said to himself that his energy was the same as his, after which he asked himself if he was truly destined to lead the family. The protagonist raised his head and turned to his father. Chiron kept his hand on the hilt of the blade and quietly replied, like this, without taking his eyes off his son. He explained that the power of Soldret, the god of shadows, flows through him. Hearing this, the boy raised his eyebrows in surprise and asked, "The god of shadows?" Then Chiron pictured a man in dark robes cloaked in shadow, and said that Soldret had made a pact with Lord Tamar, the founder of the Rankindel family, and had become their guardian since then. He also pictured a comet soaring across the sky, and added that no one had seen the shadow god since Tamar's death, so he could not say why he decided so, but it seemed that Soldret was trying to reach the ranks through him. The protagonist received the potent power of the shadow god in his outstretched hand. Hearing the tale, the boy said that he wanted to ask his father something, to which his father continued to look at him with surprise in his eyes. Jean, not taking his eyes off his father, asked if he was stronger than the god Soldret. The night moonlight streamed into the hall, and Chiron, having received such a question, pondered it. After a brief pause, he, picturing a cloak fluttering in the breeze, answered that he did not know because he had never battled a god before. The man pictured a mighty creature hovering in the sky above him with magical seals around it. Having received such an answer, the protagonist smiled in confusion and asked himself, did he not have to? Then he saw his father, who was rubbing his chin with gleaming eyes, and said to himself that he could not come up with a better response, when suddenly Chiron extended his hand, turning to his son, The boy raised his head in surprise. The man placed his hand on Jean's head and said that it was good that he asked because his innocent question gave him an excellent topic for discussion. Looking at his son, he continued to say that it was still the right choice to see him, after which he asked how he would use his power. In the hall, dust specks were visible from the moonlight. A few seconds later, the protagonist placed his hand to his chest and replied that he would use it for the benefit of the family. Hearing this, Chiron frowned and quietly said, "For the benefit of the family." Then, when suddenly a smile appeared on his face, he placed his hands on his hips and shouted loudly that he made him laugh. Then the man reminded his son how he roughed up his brothers and tossed them outside in a storm, and then asked if he dared to say that his strength was for the benefit of the family. Jean lowered his hands, and his father told him not to deceive. The protagonist's hands began to tremble, and he said to himself that of course he would not forget everything so easily. His expression shifted, and he revealed his aura, saying that he would use it to accomplish his aims. As soon as Chiron heard this, the smile vanished from his face, and he said that he liked this answer. The boy's eyes widened in shock. Passing by his son, Chiron said that he would watch him closely. The door slammed behind Jean. The protagonist exhaled heavily, placing his hands on his knees. Smiling, he said that he escaped trouble unscathed. Looking at the energy of the shadows in his palm, he was glad that there was an explanation for it. But who would have thought that his father would be intrigued by him because it was unexpected? Lost in his memories, the boy recalled himself as a teen with a blade in his hands. His upset gaze was fixed on the ground. Clenching his hand into a fist, Jean said that this life was the complete opposite of the past. It was pouring heavily outside. Marie smiled and handed Jean a small box. Giving it to the nanny, the girl said that it was a special gift from her older sister. A cunning smile appeared on her face when she said that it needed to be cooked well, chewed thoroughly. Winking, Marie said that her brother should grow big and strong. The main character looked at the girl in surprise. Frowning, he wondered why him. A bright beam shot upward. Jill covered her mouth with her hands in horror. Something began to throb strongly in front of the boy, and the nanny, smiling, Jean realized that it was a phoenix heart. When suddenly Jill placed her hands on his shoulders, thinking that Marie was wild for giving something like that to a child. Marie was a 6th rank knight, the 7th serpent bearer of the Rankundle, nicknamed the Fierce Wind, and also, although few people know it, the Fury of the Southern Lands. Placing his cane on the ground, the protagonist thought that it was clear why his mad sister gave him such a gift. Looking up, he realized that he had to grow big and strong to fight her. Reaching for his fork, Jean thought that if he ate it at such a young age, not only would he gain resistance to fire, but he would also grow faster. Placing his hand to his chin, the boy thought that a phoenix heart was needed by a 6th rank mage for safe summoning. Picturing himself with a phoenix, he thought that in this life, maybe he would even be able to call it. Dilly approached with a smile, apologizing for the wait. Placing the plate on the table, the nanny said that Lady Marie had given the boy such a wonderful gift, so he should eat before it got cold. The brothers appeared behind Jean, and he, shutting his eyes, said that if they had something to say, they should not delay. Turning away, Detona said that they noticed that they had cooked too much. When suddenly Etona scratched his face, adding that one main character could not manage it. Looking at the brothers, the younger one asked if they really wanted this. When suddenly the boys began to nod eagerly. Pointing his finger forward, Jean asked them to listen. Placing a shovel into the ground, one of the boys asked in confusion why they were doing this at all. Swinging it, Detona asked if someone would discover that they were digging here, to which Detona, without turning around, replied that the younger one would get into trouble. Having left many footprints on the ground, the brothers said that they simply had to try this soup. Mana was escaping from small holes in the ceiling. A small stone suddenly struck the iron from above. There was a large shadow inside the flask. The boy spread his arms out to the side. He continued to keep his eyes shut. After a while, the boys with the shovels returned. Seeing them, the maid raised her hand to her face in shock. The main character greeted the brothers and said that they had finished quickly, to which they, covered in dirt, shouted for him to be quiet and ordered that he bring them soup. Then Jean came up to them and, pointing his finger at the table, said that it was already waiting for them on the table. When the twins came closer, they saw 2 spoons full of soup. Veins stood out on their faces from anger, and they said that it was only a teaspoon and asked if he thought it was not enough, to which he calmly replied that he said he would give them soup, but did not say how much, so he kept his promise and then wished them a pleasant meal. His brothers looked at the 2 teaspoons of soup and thanked the boy for it through their anger. It was raining heavily outside. The protagonist removed his hood. Jean stood in the cave, saying that he thought that they did everything in a rush, but they tried hard enough. Tapping his hand on the wall, he added that a first tier spell would be enough for such a wall. Magic energy appeared from his hand, and the boy said to himself that he was already upset that there was no way to release the built-up mana. Jean smiled broadly, and a powerful aura surrounded his body. Then he rested his hands on the wall. A magical seal appeared in front of him, and an extremely strong magical energy began to be released from it. The boy looked at the stones flying in all directions with a smile on his face. Less than a minute later, he looked forward and said with satisfaction that he was finally there. The protagonist looked at the massive doors not far from him, saying that this was his family's secret storage. Raising his head to the ceiling, he added that in his past life, he never reached here, and now it was even somewhat awkward. Jean placed his hand on his hip, and said that his older brother said that a code phrase was needed. A sly smile suddenly appeared on his face. Lowering his head, the boy placed his hand to his chest and said, "The child of Rankindel wants to comfort Makoan." As soon as he said this, the massive doors shook. They slowly opened in front of the protagonist. The Rankindel's secret vault holds the secrets of the families that the Rankindels have destroyed over the past 1,000 years, and only Rankindel's flag bearers can enter it. Jean walked slowly down the wide corridor, telling himself that it was enormous. He recalled how in his past life, his brother, crossing his arms over his chest, said that he shouldn't even know about this place because he wouldn't become a flag bearer anyway. Jean looked at his companion with a saddened face. Leaving his memories, the protagonist, with his eyes lowered to the floor, said that even so, he had helped him, and now he would find a use for his knowledge. Not far ahead there was a bright light. The boy suddenly raised his head in surprise. In front of him, he saw a capsule. Inside it was a man. There were scales on his face and he was asleep. The protagonist came closer and asked if he was really not a man. Then he reached out to the glass. Without taking his eyes off the unknown, Jean asked himself where he came from. Suddenly, shock appeared in his eyes, and he shouted loudly that this could not be. The boy recalled how he said the words before entering the storage room, "The child of Rankindel wants to comfort Makoan." Leaving the memories, the protagonist, looking at the man, asked himself if he was the Black Dragon Makoan, adding that they say the first flag bearer defeated the Black Dragon, sending it into a deep slumber. The boy took out the Kungan family book with a smile, because they are also swordsmen. Starting to flip through the pages, Jean said that this is too complex a theory for third-tier magic. He reached for his backpack, saying that he would take everything with him, but then he might be caught. The protagonist took out a notebook and a pen. Placing them on the floor, opening the pen, Jean said that he would come and copy. Jilly, with a smile on her face, brought the boy dessert. A cross made of sticks was stuck into the ground, next to which lay 2 roses. The boy was thoughtfully writing down all the information. Suddenly his eyes widened, hearing a strange rustling sound. Turning around in fear, he wondered who was there. Coming closer to the door, the boy thought that no one from the castle would come here at such an hour. It suddenly swung open. As suddenly a threatening shadow looked inside, asking who Jean was. The boy opened his mouth thinking why Moran was here. Looking closely into his eyes, the protagonist thought that he did not recall anyone talking about his awakening in his past life. Looking down, he thought that he needed to calm down because Myran was the guardian dragon of their family, and he needed to show respect and then he might spare the child. After which he extended his hand, saying that the child of the Rankindel greeted the guardian of the family. A smile appeared on the dragon's face. Changing his expression, he roared loudly, asking what the boy called him. Approaching Jean, who had covered his ears, Birkin asked how he dared to treat him like a lowly servant. Releasing his claws, the dragon shouted for the boy to be cursed, and although he would not lose his temper over a small matter, he was furious. Moran squatted down, saying that he had been locked up for a long time. Looking up, he added with surprise that he had just woken up and saw a child in front of him. He began to sniff, asking why Jean smelled of shadow energy. Pointing his finger forward, the dragon said that he might have slept for 1,000 years, but he had not forgotten the scent, and that only those who made a pact with Solderit, like Tamar once did, could smell like that. Furrowing his brows, the protagonist wondered if Moran had awakened because of his power. Starting to run around the room, the awakened one fiercely asked where the smell was coming from. Grinning, the boy thought it was time to try something. Turning back, Moran asked if Jean knew something. Activating the energy in his hands, the protagonist asked if this was what the dragon was talking about. Extending his palms forward, he added that his father told him that the god of shadows had gifted the boy with his power. Moran began to shake, asking if he was serious. Falling to his knees, he asked if the one he had waited for 1,000 years was really just a child. Sadness appeared on the boy's face. They looked at each other without saying a word. Moroccan placed his hands on the floor, calling out to the boy. Raising his head, he said that he had once made a promise to Solderit, and it seemed that in order to fulfill it, he would have to unite with the protagonist. Without taking his eyes off the dragon, Jean thought about the promise. Without getting to his feet, Moran said that he would explain everything later since he had just woken up and was not yet aware, and it was unlikely that the protagonist would be able to understand. He began to tense his fingers, saying that he would introduce himself to the follower of Solderit properly. An unknown energy surrounded Jean's body as the dragon said that he was Solderit's representative. His hand turned black. His face turned the same color when he said that he was his friend. Dark energy enveloped his entire body, saying that he was the last descendant of the first creature created from the shadows. His gaze began to shine very brightly. Wind began to rise around his huge wings. Taking the form of a dragon, he said, according to a 1,000-year pact, from now on Moran would serve the boy. Jean's face showed great surprise. Without moving, he continued to look at the dragon in fear. Approaching, McCohen asked him to state his name. The protagonist smiled, extending his fist forward. He introduced himself as Jean, the 13th and youngest child in the family. Without words, they continued to look into each other's eyes. The Black Dragon Moroccan Mount Moroccan, a place with fierce winds, is named after this dragon. Long ago, the Black Dragon Moran ruled their lands. However, 1,000 years ago, Tamar Rankindel defeated Moran, and it is said that, as a result, the Storm Castle was destroyed, and Moroccan fell into a deep slumber. The protagonist looked ahead, saying to himself that he was not sure if the founder's guardian dragon was telling the truth, because anyone who makes a pact with a god must do so in tandem with a guardian dragon. The truth is that nothing was known about Solderit's guardian dragon. The boy in the white cloak stroked the dragon. Jean recalled how McCohen was still imprisoned in a capsule, and said to himself that he would not be surprised that it was all because of his hibernation. Slowly walking out of the corner, he said to himself that since he was awakened, it means that he will now become his guardian, and then said that it was him. The man, seeing the boy, exclaimed, asking if he had really come, to which he handed him the food and said to himself that since they would be walking together in the coming days, it was worth asking him about everything that interested him. So he hid Moroccan in the secret library for a long time. The dragon, spinning around, questioned why he had battled Timar. Glancing back at the book, he responded by asking if he should truly recall this, since it happened 1,000 years ago, after which he inquired if the strawberry pie had truly disappeared. The main character shook his head sadly and softly said, "Silly pie," while thinking to himself that he was certain of one thing for sure, that he was wild about strawberry pie. After some time, when the dark dragon asked him what he was up to, Jane shut the book and answered that he was scribbling, bringing blank books and jotting down everything he had shared with him in private. Mirren neared the boy and asked in astonishment if this was true, if he grasped anything at all, to which he closed his eyes and replied that he understood only about 30%, and that was it. Then the dark dragon waved his hand and, with a grin on his face, told him not to lose hope, because this was pretty good for his age, since other kids were not able to do this, and they were also idle. The main character lowered the corners of his mouth and softly said that this only applies to regular kids. He stared at the ground, explaining that he was Rankle, so he could not allow such a thing. He had 12 older siblings, as well as a mom, dad, and grandparents. The man listened to the boy with a blank expression. Jean, without lifting his head, continued to say that if he wanted to defeat them, he would have to work hard. He kept his hand on the book when he suddenly asked how much of this book the founder himself would get, picturing a man with long hair. He also asked how he would fare against the mightiest man in history, how he could show his worth. Hearing this, Moran looked up in surprise and asked if he was talking about Tamar, adding that at his age, he would not have grasped even a sentence. Hearing this, the main character looked up in shock. Then the dark dragon placed his hands on his knees and explained that book knowledge is not always needed. For instance, he had not read books, but he fought brilliantly, adding that he had promised like Tamar, but she was no match for him. Shock appeared in the boy's eyes. After hearing this, he lowered his head in dismay and asked if he would never lead the family. When Moroccan answered no, the boy raised his head curiously at his companion. The man pointed to the book on the table and explained that he had made a deal with Solderit, just like Timar, and that he was reading something very complex. Then he placed his hand on the main character's head and added that he was still young, so he should be patient and practice more. And in time he would become as strong as Timar and maybe even outshine him. Hearing this, Jean raised his head to the dark dragon and asked if he really believed that. Then Moroccan grinned broadly and exclaimed, "Of course," and then asked if he knew what Solderit was called, to which he replied that he did not know. The whole galaxy was swirling above the dark hand. The man introduced the mighty god of shadows and replied, "Infinity." Then he poked his finger at the boy's chest and added that Solderit's power was endless, which meant that he, as a follower, had no boundaries either. Tapping the boy on the back, Merkin asked him to trust in himself, so he would teach him a secret skill to lift his spirits a bit. Crossing his arms over his chest, he added that it was the unleashing of shadow energy. Surprise appeared on the boy's face as the dragon suddenly said that everyone who is involved with shadow magic should be able to do this. The start and finish of his training and mastering shadow energy. Pointing his finger at the main character, he said that if Jan has not learned everything yet, then this could be risky, so they will be cautious and slow. As the boy suddenly clenched his hands into fists, wondering where to begin, placing his hands on his hips, McCohen replied that he first needed to learn how to unlock his mana. Looking up, the main character asked why, thinking that he had often done this in his past life. Raising 2 fingers, the dragon replied that unleashing shadow energy was opening and shifting mana flows, which meant that Jean had to be able to use mana flawlessly. And that was what they would do for the next 2 years. The main character frowned, thinking that 2 or 3 years was a long time. Moroccan grinned, saying that one could not learn something advanced without knowing the basics. Stretching his hand with mana forward, the boy asked what was next. Frowning, the dragon asked in confusion how he had managed to do this, to which Jean replied without pause that he had been able to do this for a long time. Continuing to look at the main character, Vason asked if the boy wanted to learn how to shift mana, when suddenly Jean stretched his other hand forward and moved the mana into it, breathing heavily. The man said that only the greatest talents were capable of such a thing, and the boy was a skilled boy, so he would show what unleashing shadow energy looked like. The main character grinned broadly out of curiosity, starting to release mana. Mirren said that shadow energy was pulled from shadows, wrapping around the candles of mana. He said that Soldrit created all the shadows in their world. Everything around continued to be covered with energy. Looking to the side, the dragon said, therefore, Soldrit is the ruler of all the shadows in the world. The energy approached the main character, and the dragon added that Jean was his follower. Mana quickly rushed across the floor. A dark shadow appeared on the floor under the chandelier. Dark clumps of energy quickly rose upward. There was a huge shadow under Moroccan's feet. Adjusting his cloak, he said that the boy could also become a ruler of shadows. Jean began to look around in astonishment. The dragon had a clever smile on his face and said that it was the unleashing of shadow energy. The surprised boy turned his head back with a grin. The sky was red, lighting up everything around. The knight approached Luna, saying that their area was clear, and there were 5 zones left to clear, so they would handle them, and the task was done. Turning her head, the girl said that 4 months would be enough, so she asked to tell the knights that they could rest. She looked ahead upset. Luna was holding a bloody weapon in her hand. Spinning around, she asked what 9-year-olds like. Half a year after the main character met the twins, they left the Storm Castle. Standing by the carriage, they said goodbye to their brother, saying that they would meet again. Jean was called out, and he spun around in surprise. He turned 9. The maid, with a broad grin on her face, was holding a cake in her hands. The boy smiled warmly and thanked Jill for her wishes, then asked if she would share a piece with everyone, to which she replied, of course. But at that very moment, a man entered the hall and loudly called out to the main character. Bowing, he apologized for interrupting him, to which the main character, turning to him, asked what happened. Luna entered the palace. A strong aura came from her. There was cold calm on her face. As soon as Jean and Jill heard that the girl had arrived at the castle, they raised their eyebrows in shock. The first standard bearer of the Rankindels, a knight of the 9th rank, the firstborn of the head of the Whitewell family, Luna Rankindel. Although she is stronger than her siblings, the fight for power is not interesting to her. She does not join in the dirty battle for the throne. A whale swam next to the white-haired girl. She looked into the blue distance and was like a lone white whale. That's why Luna never cared about other kids and always avoided them. The main character remembered how in a past life they stood with their backs to each other, and said to himself that they were strangers, not family. They were so far from each other, and it was she who decided to come to the Castle of the Storm without any notice. Luna's snow-white hair smoothly lay on her back. The boy saw his sister walking towards him and asked himself if something bad had happened, and if not, maybe she found out that he was in the secret library. With excitement in his eyes, he looked at his sister. Luna stopped a few steps away from her brother. Looking at him, she said that he had grown, to which he replied that if he knew she was coming, he would have dressed properly. When suddenly the girl put her hand on her brother's head, and said that he was very sweet, after which she asked if it was really necessary to inform everyone to see her brother. When suddenly she grabbed him by the shoulders and said that he looked a bit unwell. Was he sick? To which he replied in confusion that it was nothing. He was just a bit nervous. Hearing this, Luna raised her eyebrows in surprise. Then Jean, raising his hand, explained that it was the first time he had seen her so close, so he was anxious. Hearing this, Luna let go of her brother and said to herself that it was normal in the Rankindel family to spy on relatives, steal from them cause trouble, after which she wondered if Jian really thought that she wanted to follow him or something like that. With such thoughts, she clenched her hands tightly into fists. Upset, the girl lowered her head and quietly replied that she had acted rudely.